My guest today is Shannon Rowan. If you don't already know Shannon or are not familiar with her work, you are in for a treat. Shannon wrote the seminal book Wi-Fi Refugee. She's just completed her new book called The Red Shoes, and there's a remainder on that title, which I can never remember. Shannon will give it to us
We'll
in a
get
few
it.
minutes.
Yeah.
But Shannon, welcome.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's The Red Shoes, Our Devil's Dance with Technology and How We Can Stop It.
All
And it
right.
is and it is being soon to be released.
All right.
Not quite yet out.
When
Yes.
it's ready, when it's released, I will put the link in the description. So I was stunned when I saw the cover of the book. It was beautiful. Did you design that, by the way?
Yes.
I thought maybe so. Yep, really stunning. And it just intrigued me a great deal because I thought the title was very interesting. And so began to read, and I before we get into this, I just would like to get a context here. Why did you write this book?
Yeah, I was really frustrated, 10 years or so frustration trying to like warn people about EMF dangers from their technology because as you know in my book Wi-Fi Refugee, I'm so-called electrosensitive. That means I was poisoned by this radiation from our technologies are wireless in particular. And I was using it like everybody else, not really consciously, and got injured, and that raised my awareness. I did research, I read all the science and studies and tried to inform people, and naively thought that by telling people about the hazards they would all want to stop, and we'd all stop and step back, reassess. Why would you want to use something that's harming you and so profoundly? But what I was met with was a lot of resistance and denial and sort of, what's your problem or you're crazy. And so I've been pondering like, well, why is it so hard? I mean, after all these years, I'm still struggling to get through to people. And there's a little less disbelief now, but there's still an unwillingness to change. And why is that? So I looked at addiction after that, and because like other addictive substances, people are very unwilling to hear that the substance they're addicted to is harming them, or even if they hear it, they don't care enough to do anything, and you think they would, but there's this kind of barrier, and so I think it's because of the addiction. So I thought, well, if I write and learn more about the addiction, maybe I can then better educate and better get through to people about the harmful effects of other harmful effects of the technology. So in a way, the book is really addressing all of these harmful effects, but from the position of the addiction as being the reason that we're not listening and we're not stopping.
Yeah, and I've really been intrigued to understand why people are not open to the harm from, changing our electromagnetic environment, versus what's been in place since the creation. But yeah, people do have difficulty until or unless they become sensitive and go through that whole experience. But I like the metaphor. I was unaware, I was ignorant of the metaphor of the red shoes and the connection to different people over the centuries that have maybe told this story already. But if you could kind of help people understand what the metaphor is all about with the red shoes.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm Hans Christian Andersen is the famous reteller of the story, and I think he retold it, and like as he did some other like traditional fables from the old country, as it were. But I actually use a telling from Clarissa Estas. I don't remember her whole name. I'm gonna butcher it if I say it, but author of the Women Who Run with the Wolves from the '90s, is a really famous book. And she's a psychologist and uses these old stories to like as to dissect them and their kind of meaning in terms of psychology. And that in our lives. And so she tells I liked her telling of it, and so that's the one I use in the book. But the red shoes really is about addiction. So it's about basically it's a young girl in the forest who's independent. She has her own handmade life that she's created. She's an orphan, but she's like managed for herself somehow. And she's made her own red shoes and she's really proud of them, even though they're kind of like, rich people might kind of scoff at them, but she made them and that's what gives them value to her. And then, but she, she gets tired at some point and, and she has this opportunity, it looks like, to like pull her out of her struggles because life can be difficult, especially if you are trying to be sovereign and do things on your own. And a gilded carriage pulls up with an old woman in it who invites her to come. She says she'll adopt her and take care of her and keep her safe and she won't have to struggle anymore. So this enticement and the ease of comfort, carries her away in the carriage that's gilded, looks nice. And as soon as she gets to the old woman's home, the old woman throws out all her old clothing and including her shoes and burns them. And which is like quite a blow, to this person, to her independence and her spirit. And that's the first blow. And then she's like made to stay isolated indoors, which I think is really important for our contemporary parallel today, which is happening more and more, is that we're feeling like we have to be safe, stay indoors, getting this message. And so then she's like, but she craves that, now she's made to sit still and look pretty and she doesn't have anything to do. And she needs to feel fulfilled like we all do. And she needs a purpose. And so instead of understanding what that is, what she's really lacking, she grabs the first thing that seems to give her that back. And that is the counterfeit red shoes, which are the shinier new store-bought ones. And once she puts them on gradually, not right away, she ends up carried away in this dance that would lead her to her death, but she has to get out of that and she can't take the shoes. So the shoes like take over as tools. They become the master. So there's this role reversal. And I see that happening with technology, the master tool role reversal, which is another theme throughout the book. And so she's lost that control and the tool has taken over and led her away. And so that she's no longer eating, sleeping. Maybe at first it was fun, but now she can't get out of it. And so the only way out is a really brutal act, which, severs her feet from her body with her shoes. There's a lot of symbolism with shoes and like foundational support, travel, independence. And so she loses her feet and she becomes a cripple and a beggar for the rest of her days, which is what she's reduced to. And I think I see that's what's happening with technology in literal ways, like literal amputations in some cases. I get into in my book with the gamer's thrombosis, which is led to like foot, and leg amputations in gamers. So this is like literal too. It's a metaphor, but we see it actually happening. So that's why I chose the story, because I think it's a powerful one and something to remind us of, which is what the intention was, to remind us in a brutal kind of visceral way with this story of like what is at stake when we give up our independence.
Yeah, a lot of the old fables are not really lovely. they have a sharp lesson to teach, and of course it's gruesome. At the end, she asks that her feet be cut off so she can be rid of the enchantment. So anyway, it's a powerful metaphor, and I would challenge anybody listening to this interview to see if what we talk about next, if you might find a place for yourself or some of your loved ones. I think we all want to believe that we're unaffected by addiction in our lives, particularly if we're addicted in different areas of our lives. But let's talk more about it. So you have a great passion for children. I can tell that from your writing. Is this all about just protecting the children, or is it bigger than that?
Yeah, it's bigger than that. What was really interesting for me researching for this and writing was seeing my own problems, my own addiction. Like especially somebody who's electrosensitive, who's given up a lot of my tech tether. I'm not very tethered compared to most people, but it doesn't really, what's that quote? And I think I have it in my book. It's no measure of health to compare yourself with a sick society or something, right? So you're not like, even though everybody else is so much more exaggerated than you, it doesn't mean you don't have a problem. So this is what the first, I think, the knee-jerk reaction people have is like, well, oh, I know somebody who needs to hear this, because we see it all around us, right? This is an epidemic here. We're having a tech addiction. So nobody denies there's tech addiction when I tell them about this, but they deny it in themselves, right? They don't want to see that. They see it outside. So I'm hoping that this book helps enlighten the reader. And I hope that everybody, this is for everybody. This is because children learn from adults. The adults are leading them. Children are not doing this to themselves, right? It's the adults, the addicted adults are teaching the children this addiction. And so, yes, they're more vulnerable and that they're more malleable and their brains and bodies are developing, but we have the problem as adults and we need to identify it in ourselves first if we want the children to change. I mean, we're the examples, role models.
You had a powerful introduction, which we skipped over, but the book actually begins with you on the beach and doing what people used to do on the beach. Going out catching waves or being in the water, having fun. And you describe a group of, well, everybody there, but you had an appendage, they're an immobile appendage, and they're staring into this virtual world. And part of your introduction was asking children whether they would rather play outside or whether they would play games on the computer. So I just happened to be in the company of some children, and I thought I would ask them, and I was horrified that 2 out of 2 that I asked answered the same way, games. One of them, of course, was wearing a Minecraft t-shirt, so that was a hint. But I think the impacts are really universal. So in the book, you describe social media and smartphones as intentionally addictive. Can you explain how this addiction is engineered?
Yeah, there are a few ways, but the main way is the algorithm design, which keeps getting better. They call it like user friendly, but it's really about what they have in their own writings, because a lot of this leaked in 2021, so not very long ago. There was the Facebook files, they're sometimes referred to, where the insider, came out in like just, hundreds of pages of documents, or maybe thousands. I think Frances, what's her last name? I'm really not sure how to say it, Howen or something, but she came out and, whistleblower, but all their own internal documents are saying things like it's all about maximizing user engagement. I mean, the end goal is maximizing user engagement. You're the user. I love the terms too, right? User, right? I mean, you're a user. It's always, drugs user, right? So any way that they can maximize the engagement, which means keeping you on longer, onto whatever platform longer, which means to the exclusion of everything else in your life, you are going to be on that platform. They don't care what it does to your health. If it destroys your relationships, destroys your mind, body, spirit, and you commit suicide because of the content fed to you through the algorithms, it's about maximizing user engagement. And they'll even say, so Meta, I'm going to use Meta as like the main, culprit, but there's TikTok, there's Google, there's several other big players in this. But, we know Facebook, of course, as the, that was the kind of first big social media. And they bought up, so Meta is the parent company now of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, right? And they have algorithms designed they actually call them rabbit holes, and they call them negative spiraling, the downward spiral, feeding the spiral. They actually encourage the designers to feed the downward negative spiral of content. So like the best way to get user engagement is through negative feedback loops, not positive ones, because they're more enticing to us. Watching a car wreck or whatever, like, keeps you more engaged. So it's just amazing what I've learned. I mean, they have the statistics themselves. They've done the studies about teen suicides increasing, body dysmorphia, gender dysmorphia, body dysmorphia, dysphoria, excuse me. and all these problems that, especially with teens who are always vulnerable to these things, and approval. But it's like, so we're manipulated in terms of our desire for social approval, and that's manipulated in us. And then we're also fed content that's more and more extreme, and the algorithm's designed to keep sending you more content that's more extreme, not what you're asking to see, but what it thinks that will keep you on longer. So that's basically like the design. But there's so many ways, there's so many sneaky ways that they are doing this, and it's always getting better and better at that, and trapping us in this. And so this is why we're always on longer. Why are we on longer on the internet all the time, longer and longer, and it's like, even when you don't intend to be, like, it seems like our days are just, even if you don't have a smartphone, it's just you have an intention, you go online and you think, I'm going to be this long, and it's hours later. Anything you're doing online, not just social media, shopping, commerce, all of it, the internet is designed as a tool of distraction. It's designed to keep you on, because the longer you're on, the more money is made because of advertisements. I mean, that's what it really boils down to. That's the design. So,
Yeah, and all of this equates to, when you're online, you're living in an artificial sea of synthetic radiation. Even if you're on a wired computer, and people don't want to hear this. Yesterday I was talking to Ulla Johansson, and
yeah.
he verified. I asked him his thoughts about simply using a computer, and he broadened it to all computational devices emit, and granted, they're unintentional radiators, when you don't have the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth and whatnot on, but there are strange and different magnetic fields, electric fields, and radio frequency radiation just from using the computers. Now, the great irony here is, I intend to publish this interview. I have to publish this interview. How are people gonna be helped by this book if they don't hear about it? But as I do, I go back to YouTube, where I will publish this, and I see that one of the metrics that they evaluate me on is by hours that the readers were on my channel. So it goes exactly to what you were just saying about, generations ago, we didn't spend any hours in this way, and you could make an argument that there's a beneficial amount or beneficial limit where you're getting the information that's going to allow you to make good choices in your life, and therefore you'll be better off for it. But it is a very tricky concept. So do you see parallels between digital addiction and other classical types of addiction?
Absolutely. And the main one is like self-neglect, neglect of self-care and in relationships. And, to the, like, you're getting caught up in something that excludes you from doing simple things often you don't even notice. And you'll kind of excuse that more and more. And as what's really interesting about this to me, and I didn't write this in the book, but just going back to like the pandemic condition, this is part of the conditioning period in my mind, the isolating, because even the messages we were getting while we were online more, and you look at statistics, how much more people are online, even how much more of now the experts are saying, well, there was a pandemic within the pandemic of addiction because of the screen addiction that increased so much because of these conditions. But we had these messages saying, well, here's the advantage of telecommuting. Now that you have to, is you don't have to shower, you don't have to shave, you don't have to, even like to say wearing a mask, you could hide your beard that's growing, you're you don't have to brush your teeth, nobody will know, right? So nobody will know that your hygiene is suffering, because they're not seeing you in person, and they're not smelling you, they're not all these things that we start thinking don't matter anymore, because we're not engaging in person so much in the real world. So we start to, slack on that degree. But also, and I get into these studies, there's a lot of studies in my book, and there are studies comparing digital addiction with cocaine and heroin, and saying the same things happen in the brain. I mean, to such an extent that games in particular, like virtual gaming, has been used for burn victims in lieu of opioids because they're that powerful, because they were concerned about opioid addiction. So you say, well, we'll get them on the games and that's better. But then they get to be, it's the same effect in your brain with the chemistry. Because if you want, we can talk about dopamine because that's the main thing. It's like, so what's happening is you're triggering this, what they call pleasure hormone without effort. And that's the problem. Dopamine itself isn't the problem. In fact, there's many researchers like, Dr. Jack Kruse, who's a, neurosurgeon, who says that we're in a state of low dopamine because we're not getting the natural dopamine because of things like inactivity, not going outdoors, again, not making our own shoes, right? We're not out there doing that. And so we suffer from low dopamine, which makes us feel depressed. So we seek dopamine, but then we get the hits so quickly. And never before, and this is so important to understand, never before in the history that we know of in mankind has it ever been so easy to get so many dopamine hits without effort. And the problem is it's an imbalance because then you don't get the other chemicals. And then it's just that cycling again of like a high and the crash and the high and the crash until you deplete yourself, just like the girl dancing out of control in her shoes that are cursed, right? The depletion that comes from that. And there's stimulus addiction. I mean, the EMF fields themselves are addictive. So in a way, it's like you can just reduce it to stimulus addiction. Like it's constantly stimulating. These fields are stimulating. The screens are stimulating you and you don't get to rest. So you're caught in that fight, flight, right, kind of dance. So that's another aspect. I don't know if I got off track a little bit here, but there's so many ways in which it parallels. In fact, a lot of the experts, that talk about this are they call it digital heroin. They call it, digital cocaine, because the effects are the same and the impacts are the same on people's lives. So much so that in some cases, infants are dying of neglect because their parents are favoring the Sims child. I mean, the craziest thing about that, I mean, there are stories literally where the parents had a virtual baby they're taking care of, and to the point they neglected their own baby who starved to death, which is so horrible and tragic, but not like increasingly common in some way, not maybe that exact way, but where gaming parents or media addicted parents are neglecting their children to the point that they die or they're, I mean, this is real. So
Yeah, I thought I read something about an infant and a father who was gaming, and was it an infant or a small child somehow
yeah.
ruined the console? I can't remember how, but
Mm-hmm.
and it ended really tragically.
Yeah, her father, she's a toddler. She interrupted him somehow in his gaming. He got so angry, he hit her so hard that he killed her. And this is like where this is another aspect is this impulse control problem that we're having, and it's reducing our ability to be patient and for empathy. So really important things are eroding in our humanity. I mean, this is really one of the internet developers, founders said that the internet, even with no intention, would just inherently be anti-human. It would just become anti-human, even if the designers didn't intend it that way. And I see this as what's happening is that it is anti-human. And when I think of humanness, I think of empathy, charity, patience, unique qualities to being human that we can foster and develop, which machines can never have, no matter how much they try to mimic being human and being so-called intelligent. Without those attributes, you can't have true human intelligence, which, you can't have wisdom. So, and this is really one of the main, really frightening aspects of what's happening with this very normalized, very accessible addiction. Like that's the other unique factor is that nothing else, when you talk about substances, they run out, you need more money for them. This is becoming so ubiquitous and basically free to be online, to have a mobile device to put you online, that it's become so socially acceptable as well that it's like nothing else again in history we've ever experienced can do this, what this is doing in terms of addiction, in terms of altering our brain chemistry and our bodies. So it's very powerful and really under recognized, I think. So yeah.
So one of the things I appreciate about your writing is you are an amazing researcher. So you included a lot of information in there about the science that they've been working on for, gosh, at least 70 years, I think. The Skinner boxes, is that what they were called? And
Yeah.
a lot of the things that we had learned about um, reward systems. And there was one part that I don't know if it was rats or mice, probably rats, and they were actually willing to stimulate. Was it the production of dopamine at the expense of being electrically shocked at the same time? And they would go ahead and favor the dopamine release. Is that what it was?
Yeah, so there's like a couple different experiments, and one is where they will, yeah, they'll go through the electrified floor to get the reward. And also another one where they actually stimulate themselves intentionally with the EMF, because the EMF itself becomes a stimulus, an escape and a drug, because they're in so much pain. Because that was in a situation where they're like put into a really painful, I think it was hung upside down from the cage with a tube inserted in it or something. I mean, just like these, I'm going to mix up some of them too right now. I've got to refresh my memory, but because there is a number of them. But it is, the end result is like, all these studies are to see, you know, what we'll do to get our hit, our fix, like what lengths we'll go to, what we'll endure for that. And the other interesting thing with some of these rat studies, like Rat Park is one where they had, so this is interesting as well, because the addiction isn't just about, the addiction really happens when with the isolation with no other options, right? So like um, rats are social like humans. So, but there was an experiment called Rat Park, which was actually to kind of refute Skinner's work. Skinner was saying, "Oh, this is how addiction works," and it's, yeah, like this just happens. That like it's kind of like they'll just do it anyway. If it's there and available, like they want to have that hit, and they'll do whatever to get it. But another team of researchers said, well, actually, if the rats have a really nice place to live with lots of room and things to climb on, and socialization opportunities and food and abundance, but like especially like ways to exercise and to fulfill their needs, they won't care about the substance. So if you put heroin laced water or whatever, in that rat park, they don't go for it. So it's our conditions, our environment is also pushing us into this more and more, because we don't have access to the things that really make us happy and fulfilled. And so we just seek that something, we're trying to fill the need that isn't being met, but we're never going to do it because it's a counterfeit.
Yeah, so there's this dopamine-driven response cycle, and it's pretty well known. And so people are opening, maybe the way I'd put it is they're opening the pharmacy of their mind, which is free, as you mentioned, and they can get a dopamine hit anytime they want. There's also stimulation, as you say, from radio frequency radiation exposure. I would argue not a good stimulation long term if you believe the health effects from that exposure. And then there's also the blue light, which I don't know if you talked about the blue light at all, but just looking at the screen, it gives you a burst of light that's really peaked in the blue spectrum. And believe it or not, the sun has a purpose with regard to our circadian biology. It tells us via certain receptors what time it is. The color of the light is different times of the day. We see this most clearly with sunrise and sunset. We see a lot of reds. But at midday is when you're supposed to, or early in the morning, you're supposed to have the blue peak. So over and over again, you're telling yourself by looking at your device that it's a time that it isn't, and you're getting this cortisol, different beast altogether, injection into your system. And levels of cortisol and melatonin are contrary to one another, and so that has something to do with the sleep lost. I was reading an article, and I can't remember the author. It was just in the last couple of days. A teacher, and she had been trying to help the children with regaining some agency over their lives versus their cell phones. So she had an accountability exercise, and I guess it was Monday, and she was going around and asking the children to say how much time they were on their phone, and they would look at the whatever it is on the phone that tells them that. And they were, I guess, I can't remember exactly, averaging 8 hours or something like that. And one of the kids, I think, said 17. And you just imagine how many dopamine hits, how much blue light stimulation leading to cortisol. If in fact I'm correct, it was 17 hours. Some of that was happening after sunset. So sort of resetting that circadian biology, and then never mind the actual radiation exposure. But can we talk a little bit about self-image and emotional triggers and grooming and selfies and that whole thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a whole chapter about selfies, basically. It's about the story of Narcissus and how he died because of his, being enamored with his own reflection. Actually, he died because he realized his reflection couldn't love him back. When he fell in love with it, he didn't realize it was himself at first. And that's when he killed himself. And that was because of a curse, because he was so into he was just very disdainful of any admirers. And so there's this whole story there. And I present that as the start of that chapter, and then show how there was this boy, Danny Bowman, who in England, who was like 15, or he was 16, I think, when this happened. But he almost died of they call it, there's self-aside. There's these terms now, so crazy. Self-aside, self-itis. Well, in that case, he actually was so dissatisfied with his selfies that he tried to kill himself over it. Yeah, so he had taken like 200 that morning and wasn't satisfied with any of them. Now, leading up to this, so it didn't just happen one day. It was like over years where he was letting the feedback of peers online get to him about his body image, start developing with body image issues, and start taking selfies to try to get a better one and a better one. He'd want it to be a model, so he was rejected by the casting agency, saying he wasn't thin enough or this enough. And so he kept trying to be that thing. And so he became so obsessed that he dropped out of school because he wasn't able to engage in his addiction during school enough. A teacher found him in the bathroom one day, hiding in the stall. He wouldn't come out because he still couldn't get a good selfie that he liked. And then it led to leaving school, led to starving himself, it led to his parents tried to stop it, but they felt helpless. They couldn't. A lot of this is hard because the parents aren't and teachers aren't aware enough of really how dangerous this is, and so they don't know how to help these kids or see the signs, and then how to help them, right? So, and often they'll just, even if you try to stop them and put boundaries and have a story about that, they will find a way. There's so many enablers. And again, and we talked about this, we didn't talk about this yet, but with the red shoe story, there's a lot of enablers. It's not just the girl doing this on her own. There's several enablers who help her. So we have to stop being that. But the enablers really are these tech, designers and companies, and then the society that's accepting this, the educators that think it's, been convinced that these are tools for children to learn from. But they have access to this. And I think about, I compare to when I went to school and how, we would pass notes around. I mean, there were bullies. I was bullied. So I want to start by saying that I spent years being bullied. I was actually severely bullied for a while. I was just targeted by other girls. I was to a point where I started being kicked and pushed and tripped in the halls and made fun of vocally. And I finally went to the principal about it. I was very shy. I didn't really want that attention. But just to make them stop at least pushing, hitting me, hurting me, physically. And I kind of dealt with the rest in my own way. But the difference between that bullying then and now is I was able to grow out of it and move on. But now there's something called cyberbullying. I mean, now when kids pick on another kid, they record it and they upload it. And then there's thousands, if not millions of people seeing their shameful moments, or where they're being made fun of, or something, embarrassing happened. And it's devastating. And often that leads to suicide because it's never going to go away. Once it's out there, it's just there, and it could go viral and whatnot. So there's all these different things happening, pressures. But the fact that kids have these phones with them all the time, and they're constantly getting the text and the alerts about the likes of their posts or not. And it's unimaginable to me, to go back through what's already really a hard time and to go through that again and have that kind of focus. And okay, so body image, the filters, right? So we've got the filters, they're getting better and better. To make you appear in a way that we're being told is the ideal beauty. I don't think so. I think it's frightening, but that's what, that's part of this grooming, but also early sexualization of children online. And children, no matter what kind of innocuous seeming platform they go on online, and even some of these designs supposedly for children with parental controls and that, they are accessible by pedophiles and groomers and sex traffickers, because once they're online, they are open to that. And there's all these ways that the platforms actually enable this, by private chats, by ways that children can hide this from their parents. There's something called sexploitation, I think they call it now, where a groomer would pretend to be a young boy or a young girl and get the other person to share some explicit sexual compromising image when they're really young, and then threaten to show their parents or whatever. If they don't do more, show more, and then meet them, and then they end up sex trafficked and sometimes disappear. I mean, it's so that dangerous that children are going missing. Their lives are ended. They're in a really horrific way too. So there's so many ways that this is happening, but the note, I thought about how we used to pass notes in school and how that was so limited though, to how many notes could you really pass in a day, right? And think about texting. How many texts can you send around in a day to how many people? It's it's incredible, and you're pressured to. And it's like you're constantly just sending notes around, and it's notes could be nice sometimes, but they could be really mean, And again, the longevity of that and the ability to disseminate to not just your classmates, but the other classes, the other schools, and the whole district, the whole online world, just doesn't end. So it's really just a whole different level of harm that's happening, and ease of harm, and and enabling this harm through the technology.
Okay, so at this point, you're probably wondering, is there some good news? So
Yeah.
we're going to talk about that at the end. Rewilding, I think, is one of the techniques that you talked about, but we need to go a little deeper. We just need to go a little bit deeper. So are there physiological effects to brain formation of children, for example, who are deprived of the kind of interactions that you and I had when we were playing as kids outdoors, versus what they're getting in this two-dimensional box before their eyes?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one thing that was really enlightening to me, by a researcher who happens to have the same last name, Rowan, Chris Rowan. She has a book called Virtual Child. And so she explains how, well, I mean, you're saying specifically brain development, but this is linked to body, so movements, and it's all linked. So she's a movement therapist for kids, and she saw an explosion of movement disorders with the rise of technology, especially after the smartphone, right? So she noticed this, and that's what got her really interested in researching these effects, because she's like, what's going on here? And not just her, other therapists, they're all getting their offices inundated with kids who are having all these problems, and a lot of them manifesting, they're getting labeled. They go through the labeling and drugging kind of mill, with the medical system, and instead of really being helped, often well-meaning professionals and parents give them more tech, and it disables them further. They don't look to tech addiction. They almost never ask how many screen hours, how many hours gaming, whatnot. So the problem is, if you don't meet certain developmental milestones at the right time when you're young, and this is involving movement, in particular, certain kinds of movement, swinging, jumping, pulling, pushing, crawling, things we don't think about now as adults, when we don't engage in those very much, are so critical to development at the right time when you're really young, for first years, that if you don't do that, then it's irreversible. You don't recover from that. You don't just make it up later, because that's your brain development too. It affects literacy skills. It affects empathy skills. It affects ability to sleep, to be calm, to calm themselves. So not only are they getting this like hyper arousing stimulation from the content and the screens themselves, the light and the EMFs, they're not getting, while they're doing that, they're not moving their bodies. So, and even just the television sitting in the room was better than this portable screen because kids would move around in the room while they're watching something. But now they're containerized kids, right? They're containerized more and more, like for safety reasons, allegedly. Now, a lot of this is lazy parenting. It's because parents are addicted to their tech. Parents are they want the screen to babysit because they're looking at their screens, but also they don't want to worry about their kids running around and hurting themselves. So they're putting kids in car seats all the time, not just for the car. You're not supposed to leave them in a seat. I mean, some studies were showing that kids were only getting 20 minutes of exercise. Toddlers were getting 20 minutes of exercise a day. Like, that's insane. You're going to have, it's just like, what are you doing? I mean, you're disabling this child, and then the child's disabled, and it's like, why is our child disabled? That's disabling your child. A lot of researchers are now saying that there shouldn't be any screen exposure for kids under the age of 2 at all, and then like limited to 2 hours a day. Some are even saying, I mean, the tech developers don't let their kids have screens till they're like 12. I mean, you don't need to. It's not going to teach them anything. You can learn this stuff. I mean, a 90-year-old can learn to use this stuff. It's, user friendly. So it's not like, you have to introduce them early. They're going to learn how to use tech, like it's not a problem for that. But it is a problem that they're not moving, and it is a problem for their brains. And there's something called video game brain. Dr. Small, he wrote a book called iBrain. And this is what's really worrying. So like there's the neurons and the synapses and what's being pruned, that's not being used, like empathy skills and that, while the other, so it's like if you're not using one part, it's not developing, and you're going to overuse the other part. And so while that part's not developing, he actually said that a year after, like they kind of did some studies with gamers and young gamers, and then a year later they saw the same effects of the brain, that the brain had not recovered a year later, indicating that some of this may be irreversible. And what's getting pruned is the higher functioning, the critical thinking, the compassion, the empathy in particular. So like, pretty frightening to think that we're raising generations of like empathy, empty, deprived children to become the same as adults who are going to behave like they're tech. I mean, if you let the tech babysit your kid, they're going to model themselves after it. So basically, you're going to become a robot. I mean, now they're saying robots. I mean, next is like you got your virtual assistants. They're going to be embodied in this creepy, robot form. I mean, that's the direction we're going in. Then you have just the robot babysitter, and then what do you think the kid's going to behave like? A robot. I mean, we see them acting like robots already, and I don't want robots around me. With that. Oh, I could tell you something interesting. We'll see if we have time, but I just happened to meet some AI developers on a kayaking trip I led the other day. Wow, quite a crew for me to be leading. I had to really hold my tongue there. But well, just real quickly, one was basically I said, "Oh, so are the AI robots going to take over?" And he's like, "Well, I mean," he's like, he started comparing. He basically argued that the artificial intelligence, these machines there's no difference between us and them and humanity. And it's no different, Keith. It's they learn the way we do. I mean, we're all programmed to some degree. You start with a program and then you learn things, and then you have your own sentience. It's sent to them. It's sentience. They don't understand spirit. Consciousness to them is computing. And these were like, younger people than me and you, and this guy who's in charge of several labs, and these are like, and he's researching bio AI. I don't even really want to ask him what that was, but I can get an idea. But he said it's no different. We shouldn't be worried because it's no different from kids growing up and taking over the world. They're just children and they're learning, and if they take over the world, it's no different from human children doing it.
So all I can say to that is I'm very glad that they were with you running a river, maybe they picked up some benefit from that.
Well, I did tell them I would, if I saw one of those AI bots that came near me and tried to touch me and talk to me, I'd bash its head in that. And I did, they laughed a little bit, but I said, it's just like my worst nightmares as a child coming true of mannequins and dolls coming to life. I said,
Yeah,
that just freaks me out.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I'm going to throw a couple things in anecdotally, and then we'll shift into something else. But 100 years ago, when I was working in industry, they invested a lot in the employees' ability to communicate effectively, and we were told over and over and over again. Shannon, I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but we were told that 70% of human communication, person to person communication, is nonverbal. And so if you think about, somebody who has an expansive vocabulary and you think that they're speaking and they're using logic and what, so there's a lot of speech going on, but fully 70% we were taught was nonverbal. So that's taking cues from people's emotions and their posture and their tonal inflections and whatnot. And then here we are in a world right now that focuses on emojis and LOLs, instead of my laughing about Shannon's desire to bash in the robot accosting her. And it's just, it's just egregious. And the other thing I'll mention is, Shannon, I think you and I might have talked about this once. We both have photography in our backgrounds. And so one of the things that I noticed was when I was photographing a wedding or something, I know I was there because I've seen the album, but I don't really remember being there because my focus in being there to photograph the wedding was very much aperture, shutter speed, the composition and whatnot. And I think you told me you had the same experience of when you're photographing, you're losing something. So I'm just making a comment about we're living in a much smaller world than we did in the past. It is offering a type of stimulation that's heretofore something that's been absent from the human experience. These are levels of stimulation that have never been achieved before. There's an obvious addiction component to it. So this is a pretty broad and a universal question. And so as I think about the metaphor of the shoes, Shannon, I got red shoes on right now. You know what I mean? I'm sitting in front of you. We're on, this magic box where we can communicate over space and distance and whatnot. And I think, well, I'm just going to be careful. I'm going to try to be cautious about my use of this.
Mm-hmm.
And yet my metrics on YouTube where I'm going to post this are running a certain way. And even if I try not to look at that, can it modify my behavior? My metrics on Substack that I'm given all the time, I hope to just write a paper and put it out there. But, can you do that? Are you being changed by, we used to say, like I say, 100 years ago when I was in industry, we would say, tell me how a person is going to be measured and I'll tell you how they're going to behave. And that was a long time ago. That was probably in the 80s.
That's very good.
So anyway, there's just anecdotal comments. And then let's move towards anything more that you want to say about how deep this mire is and how much I believe it is affecting everyone who breathes, because we're all having to have interactions in the synthetic world. But any more comments you want to make about that? And then I would like to move towards personal recovery and what that might look like.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We're all wearing them, I think, and myself included. And it's good to be aware. I think the first step is really awareness, and that's what I'm trying to bring people with the book. And I think about, to me now, the question is like more, I'm focusing for myself on solutions. How do I get myself out of this more and more? So one of the things I'd like to think of a day where I don't use the internet anymore, honestly. I'd like to, because I think it's going to happen anyway, because we have to decide where we draw the line about how much privacy invasion we're going to accept in order to keep going online. Biometric scanning, is that where you bow out? Because that's where we're headed. It's like, we've already given up so much with all the consent forms, each one and each upgrade, and we're forced into these upgrades. And I'm on a really old computer now that's struggling. And recently there've been more upgrades to different platforms, that my computer can't handle. I don't want to have to keep buying them. And the new ones have wireless features I can't turn off and things happening, not just wireless features, but more privacy invasion in the new operating systems that you agree to by having that, so it's like, and that's also, it's really telling to me that we just keep, it's really about unconscious use of an adaptation to all these new adoption of these technologies. Like we're just not thinking about it, we're just doing it because we feel forced into it at this point. We feel like we're not relevant in so many different ways if we don't keep participating. So you'll do anything to keep participating because then you lose your relevancy in your business and anything. So I think one of the things we have to really fight for is really going back to like using platforms in our businesses that we own and have control over. Unfortunately, Substack is not one of them, which I know, you use, and I was going to use, I started to, but I couldn't, I had this problem with the metrics as well. And because I have stopped using social media so long ago, and now that I'm aware of it, I resent the notifications about somebody liking something because it does affect me. We're not immune to this. I'm not immune to somebody liking my post or not and seeing if they like it or not. How much of my time is being eaten up by that? How much is it just leaving me anxious? I notice my anxiety levels just surrounding checking emails sometimes because email is like a slot. Everything's a slot machine. You don't know what you're going to get, until you open it. And there's the excitement and lure of that, but then there's the anxiety surrounding it. Is it good news, bad news, in between? I don't know. We always had mail before. We had telegrams, we had, written letters, but they weren't all the time. I think that's one of the biggest problems with this is it's just constant. And we have to at least start stepping back and making more space in our lives away from it. If you just start, and this is where we can get into solutions, is if you start putting boundaries, this is not going to make boundaries itself for you. It doesn't want to have boundaries. It wants fewer boundaries. Like the technology, the way it's developed is to erase boundaries. It's so invasive that the EMFs themselves are the ultimate boundary violator because they're microwaves that go and penetrate your body. So this is something that does not want boundaries. It does not want healthy, any of that around surrounding it. So you have to be the one to do it. And with technology addictions, there's a program now, it's ITAA, Internet Technology Addictions Anonymous, that was started, of course, by people looking for something that they finally recognized what was going on with themselves. They found gaming. There's gaming ones, that started earlier. That's officially recognized as like a mental disorder, but there was less available until this was just like 2017 that this became available, and it's increasing. There's more members. But what the unique thing about this addiction is that you can't just go completely abstinent. So abstinence takes on a new meaning and different meanings for different people. Like, so you determine what your sort of bottom line trigger is, and then there's a middle line and top line. So bottom line is like, this is going to spiral me out of control and destroy me. And you recognize that, and you get a sponsor and help you recognize that if you need. And then the middle line is like less triggering, maybe I can skirt by and do that, but it's not really that good for me. And then top line is sort of like, this is still like not great for me, but I could function. I look like I'm functioning. It's fine, but I think I want to feel better than this. And then you decide what that means for you. And it's going to be different for different people. So I think that's where we have to start. And for me, it's like, it really helped me that I cannot access internet at my house. I don't even want to try to get it there because it's going to change everything for me. Now I have a better way of having boundaries around it. But even then I can come to the internet and say, I'm going to do this, this, and this, but something happens and I'm stuck longer. And what happens often is the upgrades and the, incompatibilities. And this is like, and it happened to us when we started this show today.
It might have, yeah.
Yeah. And, we sucked another half hour of our time, right, away from doing what we intended. So yeah, it's hard. And I think we fantasize. Often we realize we would feel better with if we got away from it, but how do we do that? And how do we do it when the rest of the world is saying you can't have a job, you can't eat, you can't travel or whatever unless you put these shoes on? This is the trick. So
Yeah, yeah. So, gosh, a lot there. Putting the shoes on. And it was, going back to the metaphor, it was somebody who enchanted the slippers.
Mhm.
They weren't that way. Was it a sailor?
I think it was
Captain?
a soldier who was
A
sitting outside.
soldier. Okay.
Interestingly,
Yeah.
he was sitting outside of a church. So she had gone to church with them, and the funny thing about this that I love, and it's so relevant now, is like people go, oh, like look at her bright red shoes. That's kind of inappropriate, right? So that's what we were doing at first when people start taking their phones out in public, and you're like, oh, that person's talking in line on their phone, like that's rude, and we didn't like it, in the train and stuff, and you kind of look at them, but nobody really did anything. I mean, maybe sometimes people yell at people, but gradually more people had them, so you kind of like it became normalized, right? But her wearing them became normalized. People didn't really stop her and they didn't really intervene. And so there were all these witnesses. Her whole community saw this happening to her, but nobody stopped it. In fact, in front of the community, this man with a red beard, so devil, right? Devil symbol right there, tells her like that she's going to dance. He starts playing music and he like basically like, gets her the dance started for her. And it is interesting. I do have a kind of rather disturbing chapter about childhood abductions and the Red Shoe Club and that. So, which I actually have a warning. I decided to write on it that you might not want to read this if you don't want to
Yeah.
hear about this really harrowing stuff. But I think we also need to know that this is real. But it's interesting that there are all these male figures who are like selling her the shoes, who are cursing the shoes, who and then it's not until she's like basically brutalized, like she's tortured and she disappears that she's freed and then she's damaged forever, right? So this is like something that literally happens to children and technology is enabling it. So, this is our modern day wizardry and this is enchanted stuff. And the old woman who first took her away represents instinct that is the woman's partly blind. So she sees the transaction with her shoes, but she doesn't really notice it and she doesn't do anything to stop it either. And so she's her instinct that's like not seeing what she's doing, that she could stop herself. Yeah. So, but my
And I'll
main,
just
yeah.
mention that
Mhm.
the shopkeeper did
Yeah.
see that the woman was partially blind
Hmm.
and gave the girl a wink when she
Yeah.
chose shoes that he knew were going to be inappropriate. But
Mm.
anyway, we're fundamentally different creatures than we ever were. We're raising our young and we're living ourselves in synthetic exposures that the only known safe level is zero. And if we're engaging with computational devices, we know we don't have zero. And we are allowing our minds to be re-architected and our habits and our desires to be repatterned in ways that can only be provided by this synthetic stimulation. And so I think it's prudent that people think about their own use of technology in their lives and then also their loved ones, and how might this be affecting them. And so we used to spend a lot of time outdoors, and we're not spending so much time outdoors. But there are so many good things about that, including, helping children to spend time outdoors. There's a group, I think it's called something like the 1,000 Hour Club. Have you heard about that, Shannon?
Oh.
It was started by a mom who had this idea that she should spend 1,000 hours a year outside with her children. And I heard about this on the Weston A. Price
Mm.
podcast. And so the initiative has really grown. And so there are many families out there who have committed to this. And I think you used the term in the book, was it rewilding for our children?
Yeah. Yeah, I use that, and I don't want to use it in this kind of what's it UN way of like taking, sustainability
Oh
rewilding,
no.
where they take our land away and like move us into smart cities. I mean it in the sense of like understanding the need for wilderness and, becoming going back to that and into nature and what nature is and our place in it and what it should be, what's healthier for everybody in our world. And the only way we're going to ever save our planet is to be involved living in it, not removed from it intellectually. I mean, all these, what's happening now is this kind of using computer models to sort of, and more technology to try to like help this, manage the world and that it's backfiring, that's the opposite approach we should have. And I start with the last two chapters is the solution aspect is coming to our senses is the name of one. And so as we lose our senses, because one of the things about all this stimulation is it's artificial stimulation that at the same time is destroying our ability to sense. It's dulling our senses. So we're missing out on we're sensory deprived. That's the paradox here. We're sensory deprived as we are overstimulated with sensory input because there's only audio and visual sensory input. It's not the rest of it that we miss from the tactile experience and the scent experience in our world. I mean, our skin is our biggest sensory organ, So as computers like get more sensors, like we're losing our senses, I think is interesting. And so it's how do we come back to that? And I think it's like that's really key. Is any grounding techniques like I go and splash cold water in my face first thing in the morning and also several times during the day, especially after being on a screen. And I'll tell you that'll help. Something like that, just more exposure to elements and to things that we feel are uncomfortable. We're so focused on being comfortable that we're actually uncomfortable. We're actually like suffering disabilities that are very painful because of our aversion to sort of being exposed to a little bit of cold or draft or heat or, I mean, I take people out in the river and you should have seen this crew, of course, the IT crew, right? The AI guys and everything slathered their faces with white like sunscreen and it was hardly even like sunny. It's May and it's
Oh
like
no.
cloudy. And I'm looking at them. I joked. I said, "You guys have like the Casper disease. I think that is Casper ghost." I was like, "What is that?" But I mean, it's just this idea of like there's so much protecting ourselves from the world and separating ourselves. So this separation, this barrier, is what's making us sick. I mean, the answer to health is right there, out there in the wilderness. I keep pointing out there because I'm looking out my window, the forest, which you can't see, um, but I tell you that I could know from my own experience that I feel really good on days that I don't go online and I go in the garden all day or something. It's amazing. It's so healing. It's so simple. And it's wonderful. It's joyous. It's beautiful. We don't need all of this other stuff we think we need. And we want to get away from, I also get into like living life instead of archiving it. So going back to like we were photographers, and part of that problem with that profession, even though I was, we were approaching it as a, there was a satisfaction in terms of craft and skill in art, but at the same time, if you do too much of it, especially when I did it as like a journalist and a wedding photographer and everything, is that you're behind the lens watching and documenting, and you're not participating and you're participating in a way, but you're not really participating. And once we start turning that lens back on ourselves and we're constantly selfie snapping everything and documenting every aspect, we're not living anymore. What's the point of that? Where are you going to do you even access? I have hard drives full of photos I never look at. And like, it's just, and of course technology is trying to solve that problem for us by creating the cloud and then archiving it for us and then making albums for us. Yet we give it to them and they own it. But at least we don't have to do that ourselves. But then you even miss out of that process. You miss out of the process of the physical activity of like, say, if you were making a scrapbook, even if I'm not saying don't take pictures, I'm just saying like, let's put this in perspective. Let's calm down, like take it down a notch, start doing it less. And then when you do it, it's more meaningful. And then when you do it and you print it and you make a scrapbook with a child together and you have the memory of making it together too. You don't have something just doing it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Any other concrete steps that individuals can take to step out of their red shoes before we head to a close here?
Yeah. One of them, and I'm quoting some other people here, but I've learned from start with taking 1 hour off per day, 1 day per week, and 1 week per year, tech free. It's not even really much. I mean, 1 week per year is going to be harder for some people because they can't even get a vacation that long. But at least do the 1 day, 1 hour a day, and then build from there. Double it, if you can. Like double the amount of time it takes for you to respond to people in an email. I don't know, like things like that. Like just start to make time in every day that you do not use technology. And I don't mean just turning off Wi-Fi or, I don't, again, like it's not just about the EMFs because there are always going to be some EMFs inherent to everything, but it's about the experience that's different of being on a computer and not on a computer in the world. So, and what you'll find that happens is as those slots increase, you'll start to fill them with things that we used to do that totally forgot about, and things that are more fulfilling. And thing that's really interesting about all of this is that time will slow down. We all feel so hurried and everything's quick, faster. And that blue light actually, there's some interesting stuff I wrote about with, again, Dr. Jack Kruse about how time actually will speed up depending on the dopamine in your brain and these light signaling and everything. It'll feel, it's not just our imagination that it feels like it's speeding up and that we're just like busier because of technology. Our perception experience of it, because of how our brain is now, is faster. So you get to chance to slow that down, which is amazing, and I love it. I mean, because we're so like, you just feel like that pressure that time's running out and your life's going to end, and and then again you're like dancing with the shoes and you're running through the forest with them and you can't calm down, so you get an opportunity to stretch it out and actually like breathe deeply. But yeah, also meditation practices, any spiritual discipline. I touch on religion, and what that really means is to realign yourself, right? That's the origin of religion, is to realign. So realign yourself with center yourself with the source of your life, what gives you life and gives you peace, and maybe start your day with that. Like start the tone of your day off by realigning yourself, whatever form that takes for you. But I like movement meditation. My partner likes sitting meditation, but anything where you're able to slow down and take a break, mental break, from everything. But as you make more space away from it, you will have an opportunity to see what's really happening and what it's doing to you. I mean, it's easy to say, I don't have a problem, this other person does, but wait until you're away from it and then reassess that. It's about making conscious choices here, not just going along with it. And, I mean, this march of progress is sort of like moving us off our collective cliff. So do you want to be a part of the march of progress, or you want to stop and, just take a minute and breathe here and look at this? So, yeah, grounding thing, anything like getting in nature, hiking, anything you can do. I mean, moving your body. We're reversing this tool master roles because we're adapting our bodies to technology. I've noticed, I kind of think about how we bow, people with a phone in their hands sort of bow to it, even just that symbolically, you're bowing to this thing. I noticed that when I'm writing my books, my computer is dictating where I can sit because it doesn't like to get hot outside in the sun. It might stop working. And it doesn't want to be too cold, doesn't want to be too hot. It doesn't, and so then I'm like changing my behaviors and even just where I'm sitting because of the computer. And I resent it. And I think we have to start resenting this, get a little fight back in us. I don't even know. I've questioned, am I going to write more books, or at least they'll be shorter? I realize how much time I spent sitting on the computer, and my life is precious to me. It's, we only have like so much time here. How do you want to be spending it? So these are just questions we had to ask ourselves. But I have a more, detailed kind of steps people can take, other suggestions in the book as well.
Fantastic. So, in a minute, I'm going to give you the opportunity to summarize like one thing, if you could ask that people would take from our conversation today. But I'll just make a couple of comments that I think might be relevant. When I spend time with my grandkids, my grandson, he's at that age, he just wants to sit on my lap and have me read him a story. And I just put on the goofy affectation, of the character in the book. And we just both end up laughing hilariously. My, granddaughter and my grandson both, they have big fun just going for a walk to the mailbox, and we live out in the country, so it's down a dirt road. And they see something new every time, and there's life all around, and there may be frogs, making a lot of noise in the pond next door, and that type of thing. And I would just encourage people to do whatever it takes to be out in nature. I remember one of the characters in your book, not a character, I mean, he's a real life individual that you name, but he had such an addiction to, I believe it was gaming, that he had to go through a 12-step program to get free of it. And you know what the solution was? It's just like when I work with people from an EMF perspective and they're trying to reclaim their lives, it's effective avoidance. And nobody gets effective avoidance right in the EMF realm. Nobody knows how to evaluate their environment. They're not using the right meters. They don't know the techniques, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to go in and I have to show people how to avoid voluntary exposures and involuntary exposures to all these different types of EMF. And I just see this great parallel in, this behavioral modification that's going on. That's part of what we're talking about. But the red shoes that we've been talking about in this hour is that the final touch is avoidance and implementing effective avoidance. So I love what you just said, Shannon, about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was 1 hour a day, 1 day, and then work towards 1 day per week, and then work towards 1 week per year. That's profound too in my work with people who have been harmed by EMF. It gives them the opportunity to establish a contrast. And that's where everybody's life really begins once they become electrically sensitive, is when they're able to see a contrast. Oh, life's better without this. I think it was a big part of that was Wi-Fi in your case. Yeah. And life's not so good with, that way. So I like that idea a lot, because it isn't too much to ask, right? An hour in a day, working towards a day. Yeah, right. Working towards a day in the week. So I'm going to let you answer the question then. If a listener remembers only one thing during this interview, Shannon, what should it be?
One thing. I think what you just said, is that contrast, and is actually, I think if we go back to this 1 hour per day, 1 day per week, start with 1 day per week off, not to work to that, work to more hours per day. And 1 week per year. If you actually sit there and say, I can't do that, I think you need to ask why. Why can't you do that? Really? You can't? Like, you can't have 1 day of the week that you're not using this, that you're not using, emphasis on using, 1 hour, 1 hour a day, you can't. And maybe again, you don't see it as a problem, but until you have the contrast, I think about I think I wrote about this in a different book. But I remember when we had more restrictions on our liberties in high school because of a new administration, and I was complaining to my art teacher, and I was wondering why the younger students weren't complaining. He said they don't know anything different. They don't know a different way. The young kids may not feel well. They're autistic, they have ADHD, they're depressed, they're obese, they're anxious. They're obviously unwell, but they don't know why they're unwell. The parents don't know why they're unwell. The doctors don't know why they're unwell. And so we're not well. I want to start with that. remember, we're not well. And, you're comparing your degree of wellness to a very sick society. The bar is very low. The standard is very low. So, if you're comparing yourself to the standard, you can get away with like denial forever and say you're okay. Actually, here's another message. So it's not just about you. Okay. So yeah, maybe you think you're fine and your use is fine, but you're harming somebody with your use. You're harming people like me with your use. This is really hard to get through to people. It's very frustrating for those of us who know we're being harmed, just like with cigarettes and everybody smoked everywhere and they didn't care about the non-smokers. It's the same kind of situation. So you're not harming just other people, you're harming animals, you're harming insects, you're harming the microbes in the soil. How is it worth it? I don't know. One of those messages I hope gets through. I hope it just that people decide to step back and take pause because we are not being conscious with our choices and start regaining our sovereignty over our tools. Asking, who is the tool, your master, or are you master of the tool? I guess is the real short, succinct message, the question to leave with.
All right, fantastic. Maybe I'll just throw one anecdote in here because it's hopeful and it's timely. And that is just a few days ago, I recorded an interview with a friend that lives in Zaragoza, Spain. And there was this great Iberian blackout that occurred, I believe it was on April 28th of this year. And the power was out for many hours in Portugal and in Spain, including in Zaragoza. So my friend went outside and he didn't understand the scope of the blackout and just thought it was temporary. And he said it was the strangest thing. He knew something was wrong immediately because when he went out of his house, and he lives on a street that doesn't allow cars, so it's, people.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw people talking to each other. He knew something was wrong, something was different.
Oh no.
And so, and there are a bunch of other things to notice about. You might want to check out that video. There are a lot of learnings from it. But the hopeful point is, and then he went all over and he took radiation levels and he compared them during the blackout and then whatever, and then people still walking around with their smartphones and when they would walk by, what happened to the radiation levels and all that. But that's not the point I'm trying to emphasize. The point I'm trying to emphasize is people quickly, when deprived of their opportunity to stimulate themselves in this way, fairly quickly reverted to normal human to human, face to face communication. So I just want to leave that hopeful note and thank you for clarifying that it's a day a week, and as it well should be, and then at least 1 hour a day, I would imagine. And the book, as we've said, The Red Shoes, you need to.
Our Devils Dance with Technology and How We Can Stop It.
You knew I could. You knew I could. You knew I couldn't finish that.
It's okay.
You got to read it. Really, you do. You got to read it and find your place in it. We're all, I'm wearing my red shoes right now, and I just hope that I can take them off. At the end of the day, and I'm intentionally trying to limit my use of technology, and I would challenge you to do the same thing for you and for your loved ones. Shannon, I will put the link in the description. I will update this video when your book becomes available. How can people get in touch with your work?
Yeah, I do have a website. I mean, I'm like Keith, I'm here going, okay, I'm using some of this stuff, but I'm trying to limit it. And this is why I'm not anywhere else. I don't have a social media presence. I do sometimes contribute to my blog. I'm on Wi-Fi refugee.com. So Wi-Fi refugee with a hyphen in between.com. I will, when my book is out, I will also have a blog post there about it, an update. And it will first be on Amazon and then on Barnes and Noble. I'm thinking of only making this a print available book just because I'm trying to show how it's very different reading on a screen in terms of learning and retaining. And I just the distraction of being on a screen also is a problem. So I really want people to absorb this, and I kind of don't want them to have a choice this time. And I'm trying to support that, getting back to that way, more of an analog living. And it is more sustainable to buy print books than electronics are deceptively seem more sustainable. But as I've written in one of my blog posts, servers do not save trees. So when you are using digital media, you're using a server, which is probably on a piece of land that was cleared of forest or something else important. So it's not better. Really, this is another conversation, but I've noticed I had a book, an old book from, I don't remember when, but it was written and said, this book is made to last forever. Like it's a forever book. Like because if you use really good paper and everything, not that this is what's happening now, but we need to go back to that kind of model where we use resources in a way that's for longevity, and then we would be saving resources, right? But that's not how the design is, because it's for profit, which means disposable.
Yeah,
so unfortunately, I don't have control over that right now, but
yeah, I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
A paper book is a real book.
Yeah.
And
It
Shannon,
can be taken away from you by the internet when it decides
Right.
you can't have access anymore.
Right.
Anyway,
I always enjoy our conversations, and I just really appreciate the work that you do. Thank you for putting so much effort into this, and I can see the heart that went behind it to help people understand how we can live better by getting in touch with traditional living skills and being outdoors and interacting with one another face to face. So thanks so much for all of that, and thanks for this interview, Shannon. Appreciate it.
thank you, and thanks for your contribution to my book. There's lots of quotes by Keith in there and history. So yeah, watch out.
All right.
All right. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thanks.